Okay, you lucky people, you never had it so good. You have had part one of my response to reasonable questions for anti-SJWs. This is going to be part two. I'm going to continue with my responses, and this is a chance I'm going to break my Steve Shives cherry. I don't know how it's happened, but it's happened that I've never responded to anything that he said in a video before. So let's just crack on with it, shall we? Here is Mr. Steve Shives.
What is third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
Hello there, Steve. So it's great to finally get the chance to respond to you on video. We've exchanged views, of course, several times on different subjects on Facebook. First time I've ever done anything on video. So first let me say this isn't a differentiation that I would normally make in a video. That's probably the first time that I'm going to do. I'm going to play along with what you ask for and give an issue that I particularly have with third wave feminism. But before I do, I want to make the point to you that whilst I observe what you're talking about, that some anti-feminists, some anti-feminist, anti-SJWs have a problem with that, claim to have a problem with third wave feminism and not second wave feminism, they are not the only ones, Steve. And actually quite a few feminists that you and I would no doubt categorise as second wave feminists have the same kind of problems and make the same kind of objections. Maybe I should give you some examples. Let me give you some examples from universities around the United Kingdom. Probably three of the most famous examples very recently. Germaine Greer was due to give a presentation as part of course content at Cardiff University, and a protest was lodged. They didn't want her to be able to speak because of her transphobic views. Even though that was nothing to do, and she made it quite explicitly clear that that was not something that was anything to do with what she was going to be talking about in this talk that she was going to be given, but that wasn't good enough. And the person that led those protests and tried to get her banned from speaking there was the women's officer, Steve, at Cardiff University. I'm not saying it was the women's officer called Steve. I'm addressing you, Steve, when I say that. What about Julie Bindel, the radical feminist? Steve, Julie Bindel, quite well known in the United Kingdom, who was no platformed, Steve, from speaking at Manchester University alongside Milo Yiannopoulos, who was also no platformed. You couldn't get two more diverse people than that. Surely if we want diverse platforms with diverse speakers, with diverse opinions, with diverse backgrounds, you couldn't get much more diverse than those two, but they were both no platformed, Steve. And this was what was happening. Under the auspices of the Students' Union was the Free Speech and Debating Society, and they were holding a debate on whether modern feminism is censorious and censors debate. And that's why they had invited Milo Yiannopoulos and Julie Bindel, and you could understand, given their history with modern feminism, why you would choose those two. And the women's officer, Steve, no platform, stop both of them speaking. It always seems to be the women's officer, doesn't it, that does these things. Must be very, very powerful, these women's officers. If you're not aware, I don't know what the situation is the other side of the Atlantic. Most students' unions have women's officers because historically men greatly outnumbered women at university, and so women needed to have a voice to make sure that their views were heard on student union panels, so you had a women's officer. Of course, nowadays, it's women that greatly outnumber men at universities, and that situation seems to be growing every year, but you still need to have a women's officer to make sure women's voices are heard on these student union panels, and not a men's office. I don't know, you work that one out, I can't work that one out. But what about Mariam Namasi? Surely she's the kind of feminist that you, just like me, would have a huge amount of respect for. Anti-Muslim, speaks out against a lot of the things that go on, the egregious, abhorrent things that we would both recognise, I think, with the Muslim world. I know that you don't like to criticise Muslims too much, but I know that you're not like, you don't think it's all sweetness and roses there. She was speaking at Goldsmiths University Steve, giving a talk about Islam and her problems with Islam, and the Islamic Society at Goldsmiths University objected. They wanted to have it banned. It wasn't banned. The talk went ahead, so they protested. But they didn't just have a protest outside, they went in. They infiltrated, they got in the audience, they jeered, they heckled, they tried to ruin the talk that she was given. When that didn't work, they got up. They were very aggravational, they were very confrontational. They got in her face, they switched her projector off so she couldn't carry on with the talk. Eventually, they were escorted from there. Goldsmith Feminist Society, Steve, issued a statement where they gave their full support and backing to Maryam Nemasi in what she was doing as a feminist, going and speaking out about women in Islam and criticising the abhorrence of the actions of those Islamic Society members in that debate. Did they buggery do that, Steve? They issued a statement. This is the Goldsmith Feminist Society criticising Maryam Nemasi and standing behind those Islamic Society members that had disrupted that debate and had intimidated Maryam Nemasi. So this is not just anti-feminists or anti-SJWs that make this differentiation. It is feminists that are making this differentiation and seeing these issues. Now, just chiming in a little bit in actual fact with that Maryam Nemasi example there, you asked me what would my problem be with third wave feminism. Well, if I had to give you one, it would be the business of intersectionality. Or perhaps not intersectionality, but this kind of post-intersectionality. And what I mean by that is I understand the relevance of intersectionality and why feminists would want to take it on board. I think, unless I'm totally misunderstanding the concept, in which case you can explain it to me. But as I understand it, it's this, which is that feminists have traditionally only focused on issues that affect women just for being women. And that's really what they focused on. But actually, it's often a little bit more complicated than that, because you can have different axes of oppression or discrimination, but they can interact with one another. So if you're a black woman, you could be oppressed or discriminated against for being a woman in various ways. You could be oppressed or discriminated against for being black in different ways. But it could be that the oppression and discrimination that you receive as a black woman is more than just the addition of those two bits of oppression, but is actually greater than that. That is greater than the sum of its parts, if you like. Now, it could be that there are kinds of oppression and discrimination that you may experience as a black woman that are unique to you as a black woman, and that wouldn't manifest if you just look at oppression that affects all black people, or oppression or discrimination that affects all women. And so you need to look at these little intersections. So if you was to draw this as a little bit of a chart there, and we was to have women's issues, let's say, and black issues and Muslim issues, okay, you'd end up with that kind of Venn diagram. And perhaps traditionally what feminism has done is it's just looked at that bit that was exclusively to women. And what people are saying, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, with intersectionality, is that you need to look at those other intersections where black and woman intersect, and where Muslim and woman intersect, and where black, Muslim, woman all intersect. Now, I don't have a problem with that. That seems like absolute common sense to me. But the problem is with third wave feminism is it seems to have made a little bit of a land grab, Steve. As a lot of USJWs, they've kind of functioned like the kind of multinational conglomerate capitalist bastards that you people don't like, in that it seems to be making hostile takeover bids. And so it doesn't just go for those intersections, it's gone beyond those intersections. So now it's not just black women's issues, those issues that are unique to black women. It's black issues generally, it's Muslim issues generally. And to bring you back to that Maryam Nemasi example, it seems to me that what the Goldsmiths Feminist Society was doing was, rather than siding with Maryam Nemasi as the intersection of women's issues and Muslim issues, in actual fact they chose to go with the Muslim issues above all else and to throw Maryam Nemasi to the wolves. And so that will be the issue that I have. Stick with those intersections. You ought to be considering those intersections. Absolutely you should. But third wave feminism is going beyond that. It's making everybody's issues feminist issues, and that shouldn't be what feminism is about.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists.
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors for men but not ladies? Fuck you, get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit.
Well, to give the answer that you already know, she doesn't represent all feminists. She represents a particular strain of rather ludicrous feminism. And anybody that regards her as representing all feminists, anybody who makes that claim is a blithering idiot. And there you go, that's me being ableist, and I can be ableist because I'm not an SJW. Wow.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Yeah, but this is the problem, Tim, and this has always been the problem, that when you have a term like feminism, which is so broad that it's practically rendered meaningless to label yourself as a feminist, because there's such a broad and diverse spectrum of opinions and beliefs and goals and attitudes within feminism. And then there's what is feminism? Well, it's a goal, but it's also an ideology, but it's also a movement, or rather a whole slew of movements, many of which can't stand one another and stand in opposition with one another. And it's also an academic area of study and a methodology for carrying out that academic area of study. So many different things, Tim, that it doesn't really say very much about what you believe to say that you're a feminist, but what it does in some ways, all it tells you is what you're prepared to be associated with and who you're prepared to be associated with by the mere fact that you're prepared to hang your coat on that particular peg, the peg that you're sharing with them.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the number one priority for a rational thinker now? Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Does it? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games. Look, Anita, I'm sorry, but I can't... We can't actually destroy video games. That doesn't make any sense.
Now, what I love about this is something I've been meaning to talk about for quite some time now with regard to Sarkeesian, and the claim that this guy makes is that it's very much akin to this argument that I'm sure this Bomberman guy would have no time for, which is this one: if we were talking about something like, let's say, the wage gap, and somebody gave the retort, as some people do, well, there can't be any wage discrimination because that's illegal, as if the only level that these things can function on is some legal level, and as long as there's nothing untoward happening at the legal level, then there's nothing to worry about. Of course, you'd immediately see the objection to this, and yet there's this idea that, well, Anita Sarkeesian isn't trying to get these video games banned, so ergo, if she's not trying to get these video games banned, there's nothing to worry about, because obviously there's no other level that this can function at, is there? It's a little bit like fur coats. Fur coats are not illegal, right? Fur coats are not illegal in the UK. You can have a fur coat, but precious few people have a fur coat because there was a fur lobby that was in place and still exists, which has altered public perceptions such that everybody's made to feel like a really evil person if you go around wearing a fur coat because you're wearing the skin of a cuddly animal. You can wear your leather jacket because cows aren't cuddly, so that's absolutely fine, but wear a fur coat and you're a really fucking bad person. So all that shift from wearing fur coats has happened not because of legislative change, but because of the kind of public pressure that Anita Sarkeesian tries to apply under something that I hope I've demonstrated in the videos that I've made, quite a disingenuous campaign, where what she says is, all I want to see is a greater amount of diversity, and yet it's clear in some of the other things that she shows that even precious scant small amounts of things that are even if you hide them away in Easter eggs, so the only way that you can find them is if you go searching for them with some special code, and even if it's a small proportion of Easter eggs that have these things, she's still not fucking happy with them. She still thinks that they are ethically wrong. So that's kind of the problem that people have with Anita Sarkeesian, and this idea that, well, she's not trying to get video games made illegal or certain kinds of content within games illegal, ergo nothing to worry worry about is just absolute bullshit. And this guy would not accept that if it was in an argument that was working against him. He shouldn't make it just because the argument is going in his favour.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
Okay, so I have kind of really mixed feelings about this. With regard to breaking bread and salt and this breaking virtual bread, I wish I only had the time to do more sort of hangouty, podcasty type things. I don't have the time, and I don't have the scheduling flexibility that's needed for that. But sure, I have absolutely no problem with that kind of thing. And over the years, I started on YouTube in 2008, I've had many very pleasant exchanges with Muslims talking about Islam and views on Islam, but also both on the sort of technical, theological side, but also on the cultural side. And, you know, I don't have any issue with that. And on individual Muslims, I don't have any issue with individual Muslims as people, because I rate each individual person as a person, and I judge their beliefs and their actions based on them and not on some average of some group to which they belong, right? So that's kind of how it is with regard to that. And in real life, I've had some very interesting and enjoyable interactions. You might not be aware, sort of coming from the other side of the Atlantic, but perhaps one of the great meeting points between Muslims and non-Muslims, you might not be aware of this, certainly within the large parts of the Muslim world and the sort of British colonial part of the rest of the world, is the sport of cricket, right? It really is something that fuses different cultures together. And a lot of teams that have traditionally not been Muslim teams, i.e. not Pakistan, now have quite a number of Muslim players that have played at international, at the elite level, at the top level. And then some of the Middle Eastern countries are getting more interested in cricket. So that's a real good point of exchange there, where people can have something in common. And I mention that because I used to play a lot of cricket, and I've played cricket with Muslims, and we've got on really, really well. There's been absolutely no problem there. Right. So that extent, I have no problem with what you say. But then you make this big thing about all these terrible things being said in communities. I've got to say, I've obviously not seen as much of it as you have. For the amount of times I've ever heard anybody use the expression camel fucker, I must have heard a Welsh person be called a sheep shagger 100 times, right? It must have happened 100-fold. And I know what you'll say, the intent is different in those two cases. Just don't say that in front of Steve Shives, right? Because he has a problem with people saying that intent is magic there. Okay, so yeah, I just don't see the scale of the problem. But I know that some people do say things like raghead and all this kind of saying, and do say really objectionable things. What I will say is this, right? Where I will accept the sanctimony is when those things are said to Western Muslims who are living in the same communities and the same nations that I live in, and there I find them objectionable to the point where I'll say something. But whilst they're not words that I would use myself, where I've got to tell you to take your sanctimony and stick it up your arse, Christiosity, in the nicest possible way that I can say that, is when you're talking about Muslims living in some of these other countries, many of them in the Middle East, where in those countries it's not just the case that somebody occasionally on some bulletin board or forum says something slightly disparaging about an atheist and somebody doesn't clamp down on it. It's that the state sanctioned punishments for openly being an atheist is the death penalty, Christiosity. And these Muslims that you want me to stick up for because somebody might have called them a raghead, what are they doing? How much of a shit do they give about that, right? How much of a shit do they give about something as abhorrent and objectionable as the death penalty for declaring yourself as not having a belief in God? How about the situation in Iran, whereas if you're a Muslim apostate, the death penalty, but if you're not, you don't have to be a Muslim. But if you're not prepared to say that you're either a Muslim, a Christian, a Zoroastrian or a Jew, right, if you're not a person of the book, if you're not a person of some Abrahamic linked faith, then most of your legal rights are just gone. You will not be granted those legal rights. So if you're an atheist, you shut it, right? You're treated like a piece of crap by the state. How many Muslims in those countries, those ones that you want me to really be concerned about and to stick up for and to make sure nobody says anything bad about them, right? What do they do? Right? How concerned are they about atheists? Maybe when they're a little bit more concerned about atheists within their own communities and what the state does legally to them, maybe I'll be a little bit more concerned about how people are speaking about them. How does that grab you?
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step over, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
So I'll address this one and then this will be the last of this segment. I spent the whole day filming to get the first couple of ones recorded, never mind editing, so I'll have to address the rest of these questions on a different day. Well, let me address this then. Do I think that systemic racism is a thing? Yes, I think it's a thing, but to what degree it's a thing, it's difficult to say. And we're all like those sort of blind Indian gentlemen feeling at parts of the elephant, aren't we? And just describing the bit that we feel. And certainly with respect, I'm assuming he's majoring on the sort of United States of America kind of experience. I'm from the other side of the Atlantic, so I can only guess. I know with regard to the Black Lives Matter thing there, on the one hand, I've seen some of these things take place on university campuses, which have left me shaking my head. And then there was that gay pride march where all the BLM protesters sat down and sounded, I mean, the demands that they were making made them sound like an absolute bunch of entitled twats, and to my mind doing everything the wrong way. Not changing rules so it made things fairer to people, but having specific rules just for them. And as I said in the video that I did make about Black Lives Matter in the United States, for me that is totally the wrong way of doing it. Making specific rules for specific groups to grant them specific privileges, sort of two wrongs to make a right, isn't the right way to do it. But that video I made was actually a supportive video of Black Lives Matter because what it majored on was this 10-point plan for policing, which I thought was an eminently reasonable plan in the main. And what it did was it looked at policing and said these are the changes that need to be made. But rather than specifying this is the way that you have to police black people only, what it did is it makes changes that apply to everybody, cognizant of the fact that, of course, that will positively impact upon black communities, perhaps the communities that need those impacts more than it will on some other communities. But nonetheless, they're good changes, they're reasonable changes for all involved. Okay, so that's the right way of doing things and the wrong way of doing things. And for me, the good side of Black Lives Matter there and the not so good side of Black Lives Matter. There's a Black Lives Matter in the United Kingdom, and what a shower of shit they've looked like, I've got to say. I mean, if it's any indication of the difference between the amount of systemic racism in the United States and the amount of systemic racism in the United Kingdom, there can't be that much in the United Kingdom. One of the things they went at, they did a protest and shut down London Airport. They all sat down on the runway to stop the planes flying because air travel is racist against black people. The only thing is they couldn't seem to quite decide amongst themselves in what way it was racist. On the one hand, there was some of them saying it's racist because it contributes to global warming, and global warming, according to them, disproportionately affects Africa rather than Western Europe, although if the Gulf Stream stops on account of it, as it could do, ultimately it would be Western Europe that's in a fucking ice age and we'll all be moving to Africa to live where it'll be a lot more reasonable there. So that's not even necessarily true. But then there was another group saying, well, that's no, the reason it's racist is because London Airport is flying people in and out of London, and that's causing sound pollution, it's causing air pollution, and the majority of people who are flying in and out of the largest city in Western Europe are white people, and yet a disproportionate number of people who live in London are black. Well, who'd have believed that a major capital city would have a more diverse populace than the rest of the nation? Who would have imagined that? So I don't know what they think that we should do instead. People who want to fly to London have to land in fucking Newcastle or something and then get a 4-hour coach journey down to London. I'm not quite sure. But in one way or another, they decided that it was racist there. What I will say with regard to systemic racism and my observations in the United Kingdom is that there are issues for black people. Right, there are racism issues. Some of them, it's been documented, are issues of systemic and institutional racism. Others of them aren't. They're more just individual acts of racism, and they all need stamping out. But my observation is this, is that the whole narrative of racism and other ethnic groups, minority ethnic groups, has been dominated by black people, by people of sub-Saharan African origin, such that it's framed in terms of white people and people from sub-Saharan African origin, and nobody else seems to get a look in. It's been largely to the detriment of people from South Asia, who often experience the worst racism of the lot, and almost to the total exclusion of people of East Asian origin who never even seem to get a fucking mention. It seemingly just doesn't matter whether they're represented in the media or in sports or in anything else whatsoever. It's like, well, we can just forget about them. Those people don't even fucking exist. So whilst there may be issues to be addressed with regard to black people, set that to one side, and on the other side set the fact that those measures that are put in place and the dialogues that take place and the dialogues that this chat wants us to have more of have actually focused almost exclusively towards people of sub-Saharan African origin, black Africans if you like, often to the detriment of people from South Asia, and almost exclusive to the total exclusion of people from East Asia. That's how I've experienced it anyway. Okay, thank you for watching this second part. I hope you join me with the third part. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.